So it's getting towards the end of July now, and the front yard foodscape has been growing really well, and we wanted to give you a quick tour. So I have some footage that we'll see in a second from July 25th that should show you around and show you all the things that are happening now. But in this area, now that it's the second half of July, and really through the end of September, both our gardens in the front and the back are in what we would call peak production. So we're pulling massive harvests out of here almost every day. So it's a really busy time in the garden, but it's also a really exciting time because you get to see all the growth. So now we're coming up with lots of tomatoes. We've been eating some tomatoes, mostly cherry tomatoes, since the end of June. But now it's just every day there's loads of tomatoes, and now with squash and beans and eggplant and other summer crops coming on, peppers, onions, we just have a real abundance now mid-June, at least through the end of September, maybe early October, depending on the weather. But we have been eating out of the front yard foodscape all season long, really. Starting with cool season crops, we started eating our first things out of here probably towards the end of April, early May with the cool season crops. We had beets, we had broccoli, a little bit of cauliflower, we had lots of peas. In other areas we had lettuce and spinach. And then a little bit later, we started with a little bit of strawberries, and then mid-June into early July, we had artichoke, and we pulled some harvests out, but it's nothing like we have now with the massive loads of tomatoes, and we're about to have with squash and eggplant and beans. So there's a lot of exciting things happening, and if you're curious about how we do both cool season and warm season crops, you can check out, we have another video on multi-cropping. Check that video out. And then one other thing that I wanted to mention that's featured throughout this video is really tight spacing. We do pack the plants in pretty thick in this area in the front yard foodscape where we have lots of sun, but we really do that to maximize the use of space. We want to capture as much of the sun's rays as we can. We don't have solar panels at our house, although we should, but we're really getting a lot of, we want to get as much of the sun as we can, and we don't want to let any of it hit the soil. That helps us use the area more efficiently, but it also helps us conserve water because keeping the sun off the soil helps with evaporation. So here in Utah, where it's really sunny and dry all summer long, we really need to think about conserving water. So we use drip irrigation, and we shade the soil as much as possible. We put mulch either with compost or wood chips throughout our foodscape as well. So, but it's a really exciting time in the garden and the front yard foodscape, so I hope you enjoy the tour. Here's our salsa garden. Here, I mentioned in an earlier video that we're experimenting with really close spacing. So here we have 18-inch spacing, and you can see the plants are doing really well. We're getting tons of ripe tomatoes out of here. We've already made salsa. We're gonna make marinara sauce. We're gonna have several batches. We're gonna have way more tomatoes than we can eat fresh, which is awesome. We can do a lot of preserving. But the challenge or the negative with this close of spacing has actually been that it makes it harder to find the right fruit. There's just so little space in there that you really have to dig around, and we've already done some pruning of the tomatoes to keep them back. You really have to dig around to find the right tomatoes sometimes. As you can see, like way in here, we've got some ripe Romas. But I think the plants are really healthy. There's no problem with this tight of spacing. There's no disease because of air circulation. There's still enough air in there. One thing that enables this closest spacing is the amount of sun that we're getting in this area. this front yard foodscape, one reason we've gone with such tight spacing is we're just really getting sun all day long. There's zero shade. So from the time the sun comes over the mountain until sunset, these beds are in full sun, and I think that's what's enabling this growth that's just incredible, much more than we've been getting in the backyard. Also with the drip irrigation and the really rich soil, I think that contributes it. But we've grown marigolds for years, and I've never seen anything like this. Like, this is one French yellow marigold plant that just turned into this massive bush. I mean, usually we see something like this one. This one's on the south side of that one. I mean, so it's just been getting so much sun that it's just huge. So obviously there's really nutrient dense soil in this area, and with the drip irrigation and sun all day long, I think we're just getting a lot more growth and production. So let's take a look at a couple other things here. Here we have butternut squash going up a trellis, and we built these 7-foot trellises. This is just a 2x2 redwood, and this is wire mesh that's used for laying concrete, and it's about 7 feet tall. And I built those and planted 2 butternut squash there. Earlier in the season we used it for peas, and it was more than enough trellis for peas, but now we put these butternut squash in here thinking that it should be about the right amount of trellis, but with 2 plants on each side, we've had so much growth that I went ahead and connected them with some wire at the top, and just to make sure it's strong enough, I put some extra wires in here too. These wires, not sure how well you can see it, but we're gonna go ahead and connect it over the top and turn it into a little more of like a arch or an arbor, and have little butternut squashes. It's a baby butternut squash, so we'll have some hanging up. You can see there's one developing right here with that female squash flower right there. So it's already loaded with flowers, so it won't be long before we have tons of butternut squash. We haven't had any yet, but we've had our hands full with tomatoes so far. And then here we've got more marigolds, and these are borage, of course. One thing I wanted to show you too is our artichoke. We probably pulled 10 to 15 artichoke out of these areas with the 4 plants, and then we decided to let the rest of them go to flower. So this one's already flowering, makes a beautiful purple flower that the bees like. This area has just been packed with insects for months now. Here's a honeybee on a marigold there. And there's a lot of bumblebees, a lot of dragonflies, all kinds of beneficial insects in this area. And I don't know how well you can see them, but we do have strawberries in between the borage and marigolds mixed in. And actually they're getting some shade because of the size of the other plants, which helps. Strawberries don't like the heat. I mean, we've been over 95 most days now throughout July, so actually a little shade keeps them in production. Like, in fact, looks like there's a ripe strawberry right there. So with these day neutral varieties of strawberry, they can produce fruit really anytime the weather is warm enough. But in July in Utah, they typically don't produce fruit because it gets too hot. So we don't mind shading them, and that should keep them in production. So in this area, it's also packed really densely. We're capturing all the sunlight, not letting any hit the soil. And these bush beans have really gone crazy. And this variety is called Royal Burgundy. Makes a pretty burgundy colored bush bean that turns green when you cook it. But we're gonna be just loaded with bush beans. We already are. But for the next several weeks, these bush beans will be growing like crazy. Here we have more squash, more butternut squash growing up on this trellis, and these are pole beans. This is Kentucky Wonder, I believe. So we'll see if they make it to the top of that trellis. And then here We have eggplant. We have eggplant on both sides. These eggplants are doing awesome. I'm impressed. This is the first year that we've grown eggplants, and in this space they're really doing well. We pulled 10 of them off yesterday. There's a little one there. I think there's a bigger one here. They've been producing now for a couple weeks. Our biggest harvest was yesterday with 10. Here's a big one. Okay, so that one's about ready to harvest. That's Black Beauty eggplant. Over here we'll show you the amaranth, which has just gone nuts, taking over that whole space. My wife was out here earlier and it looks like the seed's ready to harvest. It's the first time we're doing amaranth. It's a bit of an experiment. Mostly planted it for the ornamental aspect. Really looks neat, but we might try to get some grain out of it. So we'll see how that goes. And then let's see, talked about the eggplant. And here's our Pluots. We're growing 2 Pluots here in the space of 1 really. And we're using this as kind of the centerpiece of our front yard foodscape. So it's been about a month since we did our summer pruning on these. We do that at the end of June. Check out our video on summer pruning and the technique if you want more detail on that. But the Pluots are looking really good. They've responded well to that pruning. Got quite a bit of new growth coming out. And around them, this is as kind of a ground cover, we have chamomile. And we chopped it down and just kind of laid it down as a mulch there. We're still getting a couple chamomile flowers, but that'll self-sow and come back next year. And we harvest the chamomile to make some tea out of it too. And one more thing I wanted to mention is even in areas where we're not getting production anymore, this is broccoli and this is cauliflower, and it's way too hot for them. We're not eating this anymore. We went ahead and let it flower, which is good for the insects. But one other reason I'm leaving this in here right now is I just sowed some Swiss chard in between these plants, a row of Swiss chard in there, so that and I leave the plants in there to shade the soil, which makes it a lot easier for seed germination. We're almost done here. I'll just show you our asparagus. Looks like it's doing well, getting pretty tall. And then here we have some parsley, which we're growing that parsley so we can make some marinara sauce with all this massive load of tomatoes that we have. So that about wraps it up. Thanks for watching Foodscaping Utah, and grow your own.